Right, hello everyone, and welcome this evening. Before we start, a couple of housekeeping notices. Can I ask you to turn your phones off or put them on silent? And we are not expecting a fire alarm this evening, so if it does go off, please follow a member of staff outside the building to your nearest exit. There are lots of people in purple t-shirts, our event ambassadors, so just keep an eye out for those. So my name's Rob Summers. I'm Head of Development at the University of Manchester in the Division of Development and Alumni Relations, and I'm delighted to welcome you all here tonight to what should be a fascinating talk. This lecture is part of a series of lectures we run at the university called Your Manchester Insights, and the lecture series is designed to highlight to our alumni the outstanding research that's happening here at the University of Manchester, to showcase our star academics, no pressure, and to share important stories with our alumni about how we are tackling the big issues of the day. So I'd now like to introduce our speaker for the evening. Professor Will Dixon is Principal Investigator of the Cloudy with a Chance of Pain project, and Professor of Digital Epidemiology at the university. The project that he's been running aims to answer the age-old questions about the relationship between weather and pain. And this evening, Professor Dixon will take us through the study, which has involved over 13,000 people getting involved by recording their long-term pain conditions every day on an app on their phones. So please welcome Professor Dixon.
So first of all, I have to get past my security otter. So thank you very much, Rob, and it's a real pleasure to be here. I was honoured to be invited and delighted to come and talk to you all. Let me start by describing what I'm going to talk about through the course of the lecture. I'm first of all going to introduce the relationship between weather and pain. I'm going to outline how smartphones may be an excellent new tool for health research. And then I'm going to tell you about the journey that we've taken on this new research study, Cloudy with a Chance of Pain. I'm going to show you some details about our participant recruitment and engagement. I'll describe some of the analysis methods that we've used and tease you with one or two results, and then tell you what's coming up for the project and the team. I'm both a rheumatologist and an epidemiologist, so I spend a day a week at Salford Royal, where I look after patients with arthritis, and the rest of the time here at the University of Manchester. I think having these two jobs is synergistic. So from my clinical work, I'm able to understand questions that are important to patients and people living with arthritis and other long-term conditions. And I can take those questions and answer them using data from large populations of people. That's the science of epidemiology. And through that population health research, bring the results back to the clinic to ensure that we make a difference to people's lives. This is where I work. Some of you may recognise it. This is the Stopford building down on Oxford Road. I direct the Arthritis Research UK Centre for Epidemiology. That's its current title, but it's been through many iterations over the years. It was founded in the 1950s, and the two halves of the title have changed. The funder has changed many times through the years, and the epidemiology title has changed. And if you wind the clock back, we were first known as the Empire Rheumatism Council Mobile Field Survey Unit. And the first director of the department used to drive out in this van and examine people with arthritis. And one of the first studies that was run from the department was a study of mining and rheumatism. And I'm going to show you a video from the 1950s of this first study. So this was John Lawrence. He was the first director of the department. And at that time, he and his colleagues were using state-of-the-art technology. This was a hole punch, and you'd enter the data on this card, you'd punch holes in it, and I understand you used to thread a stick through the holes and shake the stick, and then count how many cards fell to the floor. But as we've moved through the decades, the technology that we have to support epidemiology has changed, and we have to move with these times. But before we get on to epidemiology, let me take you back to my other job as a rheumatologist. And here I am in clinic, and here's a cartoon of me, rather cruel, I think. I'm thinning a bit, but not quite that bad. And saying to my patient, "How have you been feeling recently?" And the patient replies, "Oh, much worse. What with this recent weather?" And in fact, in most clinics, it's more than one patient that will tell me that same thing. And I became interested in this and started to ask people, well, what is it about this weather that makes you worse? And one patient might tell me that it was the rain. The second patient might tell me that it was the cold. And then there's always one who says, "This miserable weather, and can I have a prescription to move to Spain, please?" Now, this is a relationship that patients believe strongly in. In fact, 80% of patients with arthritis believe that there's a relationship between weather and pain. And in fact, over half of patients believe that they can predict the weather based on their symptoms. And if you watch carefully in the film Paddington, you'll see Mrs. Bird in the kitchen holding her hip and saying, "Oh, I can tell there's a storm coming. I can feel it in my hip." Now, researchers have tried to answer this question over many years, but that prior research has no consensus. Lots of studies tell us lots of different things. And the reason for that is because it's a very difficult thing to study. Many studies have small numbers of participants. They might be cross-sectional, meaning you just ask people at one moment in time, or they have short periods of follow-up when the weather doesn't really change, just follow people for a few days. You need to have accurate weather data. And some studies assume that patients stay where they live, but in fact they're moving around and exposed to different weather. And then even if you have good quality weather and good quality symptoms over long periods of time, how do you analyze that data? Is it the absolute values of the weather? Is it the maximum value or the minimum or the change? Is it that the temperature's gone beyond a threshold? Is it a lag effect? Is it today's weather or yesterday's or 2 days ago? So it's really difficult. But I believe that there's an opportunity through the technology that we all have to do better research in this. Which brings me on to introducing the concept of using smartphones for health research. So the first reason that this is a big opportunity for us as epidemiologists and other researchers is the penetration of smartphones. So 8 in 10 people now in the UK own a smartphone. Here's a picture of a smartphone. It's a phone, as it suggests. What you can see on the screen here are applications or apps. And here's an app for the management of rheumatoid arthritis. So patients can track their symptoms and score where they have tender or swollen joints. But it's not just the phone and apps that run on a smartphone. It's a bit like a Swiss Army knife. There's all sorts of kit within a smartphone that might be useful to us as researchers. So it contains an accelerometer and a gyroscope, and that allows your phone to study the movement of the phone. And that can be turned into useful information. And here is an app called Moves that tracks your physical activity. It tells you how many steps you've done. It can differentiate between walking and cycling and running, for example. The icon at the top there, the little arrow, that tells you that the phone has a GPS, a global positioning system, and that allows your phone to know where you are and can tell you that it's another cold and miserable day here in Manchester. Now, combining some of these ingredients allows us to answer questions that we previously struggled to answer. And so a few years ago, we had the concept of cloudy with a chance of pain, with the idea that we would track symptoms in patients using an app, but then using the GPS, we would automatically pull the weather data local to where the participants were. So these two ingredients, the symptoms and the location, and hence the weather data, allows us to look at the association. And the benefits of doing it using smartphones are, in theory, that we can recruit very large numbers of people. 8 in 10 people around the country have a smartphone. We can track symptoms on a daily basis, perhaps over many months. And we can pull the local weather data without anyone having to do anything. So a real opportunity. The downside, though, was that we'd never run a smartphone study before. But don't let that stop us, because nobody else had done that either, so we thought we may as well have a go. So wind the clock back 3 years, and we ran a pilot study, was funded through the MRC's Confidence in Concept program, and in partnership with UMotif, who are our technology partner. We co-designed a smartphone app with UMotif and with lots of patients who had rheumatoid arthritis. And here you can see a picture of the app. It had 10 questions, and each petal of the flower-like motif represents one of those questions. So you can see here highlighted in green, they're answering the question on fatigue, and it says, how severe was your fatigue today? And it's moderate, and if you pulled that green petal out, it went up to severe and very severe fatigue, and if you pulled it in, it went down to no fatigue. It was really important that we had excellent patient and public involvement, because they really helped us refine what it was that we were trying to collect and why and how we designed it. And I think that really helped us in our engagement as we went through the study. And here you can see our patient and public involvement group, who were really helpful throughout the course of the pilot study and then through the main study. So here's the app in action. You got an evening prompt at 6:24 p.m, scientifically proven to be the best possible time to ask a question, between the evening news and the weather. And then you filled in these 10 items, and then you didn't have to do anything else, and the GPS automatically pulled the local weather data where you were. So we were running the pilot study in 2015. We didn't know whether the technology would work. We didn't know whether patients would enter their symptoms. We didn't know whether the GPS would work. We didn't know whether it would link to the weather data. And then about a week in, we got the first 5 days of the first participant. And so this was a very exciting day for us, and I'll show you the graph building up. So this is temperature in blue. And you can see the day-to-day fluctuation because we're pulling hourly weather data. And here's the patient's pain reported once a day. That was the reaction I was hoping for. And that's indeed what happened to us. We go, ooh, this is really exciting. Great that there's a relationship. Except it went in the opposite direction from what we were expecting. Now, whilst we were doing the pilot study, we were contacted by BBC Two's Trust Me, I'm a Doctor. And they were trying to find studies across the country that were using people's own technology to answer scientific questions. And they were very pleased because our study was actually running. Often they come in before the study started or after it's finished, and so there's nothing to film. But they came along and filmed our pilot study. And they said, we'd like our viewers to take action after they've watched the features. What could our viewers do after they've watched this feature of yours? And we thought, well, this is a pilot study. And we thought if the pilot study was successful, then we might scale it up. And you've got viewing figures of 2 million people. So maybe this is an opportunity for us. Except we only had money to study 20 people and not 2 million. So we had to go and find funding for the scaled-up study that we'd only really been thinking about, but we had to do that very quickly. And very generously, during the period from the BBC filming us in May to the time that they told us that they would broadcast the film in November, we were able to submit a grant application to Arthritis Research UK, who peer-reviewed it very quickly for us and provided us a grant, and then we had to get very busy to get ourselves ready to recruit large numbers of people. So, in fact, we had a 2 months grace because the scheduling was postponed through to January 2016, but then the program aired on the 26th, I think, of January 2016, and Chris Van Tulliken here did a great feature about arthritis, and at the end of the feature, they directed people to our study website and encouraged people to take part. And in fact, a few days later, I had the pleasure of going on the red sofa at BBC Breakfast, who had viewing figures of 7 million. They also did a fantastic job of introducing the project and directing people to the website. And there at the website, we had a video ready to describe the study, and I'll show you that now.
I'm Dr. Will Dixon, a scientist at the University of Manchester and a hospital doctor at Salford Royal, where I look after patients with arthritis. In almost every clinic, one of my patients will tell me that their joints are better or worse because of the weather. And yet researchers have never worked out whether this relationship truly exists. With your help, and with the help of your smartphone, we're going to work this out together. Even in ancient Greece, people like Hippocrates talked about the weather influencing how people felt pain. Fast forward 2,300 years, and we finally have the technology to answer this question. To take part, you need to follow the instructions at www.cloudywithachanceofpain.com. Just click on the Take Part button, answer a few short questions, download the U-Motif app, and track your symptoms each day. Your smartphone will automatically collect the local weather using the GPS. It's as simple as that. Your data, along with thousands of others, will build up a huge data set that we can analyse. And you can join our scientific team. By visiting the website, you can interact with the data to spot any patterns and submit your theories or hypotheses. And that's it. All set in 10 minutes and helping to answer an age-old question with the power of technology. We're looking forward to working with you.
So what happened next? So the next section is about participant recruitment and engagement. So we had no idea what was going to happen now. And this is our graph of our recruitment figures for the first week. When we submitted our funding application to Arthritis Research UK, who are now Versus Arthritis, they said, how many people will you recruit? And we said, well, we don't really know. We've never done this before. And we've no idea quite what's going to happen. And they said, well, we had to give them a number. And so we thought, if we had 1,000 of people across the country, that would be wonderful. And if we had 2,000, we'd be the largest ever studying this question, and hopefully for the longest period of time. So we said 1,000 and maybe 2. This is what happened. This is our graph. So day since launch on the bottom, numbers of participants on the y-axis. BBC Trust Me, I'm a Doctor aired, and this is what happened in the first 4 days. So we hit our 1-year recruitment target after 4 days. And then BBC Breakfast happened, and then this is how the graph changed. Where we had the very unusual problem of vertical recruitment, which doesn't happen often in the epidemiology unit. So we were all feeling very pleased with ourselves at this point, except there was a bit of noise of people saying, what a waste of taxpayers' money. Whilst the BBC had been doing a thoroughly good job of directing people to our website, we were also on ITV News on the launch day. And instead of directing people to our study website, they directed people to their own Facebook page. And here they are, the feature about scientists at the University of Manchester have launched a big citizen science experiment to assess whether the weather affects people's pain. Do your aches and pains get worse when the weather changes? Let us know here. And then down at the bottom, you can see the first person has submitted their comment. This is comment number 1 out of 564. I have fibromyalgia, so of course the weather affects my pain. They could have just asked doctors to confirm that. Of course, I am a doctor, and this was why I was doing the study. Anyway, some more comments. Oh, for goodness sake. Everyone knows that cold, damp weather affects adversely aches and pains. What a waste of time and money. They need to get a proper job. I'm definitely better when it's warm, but I also seem to have more pain when the weather changes from one to the other. Everyone knows cold makes pain worse. If they need to send me to a hot country for a month to make sure, I will volunteer. See, I told you there's always one. It's the air pressure that does the damage. Warm weather makes my arthritis worse. Anyone with a modicum of sense knows that the weather affects illness and pain. Scientists do what they do well, wasting money on worthless tests that benefit nobody. Okay, so I can laugh about it now. But then when you read through these comments, there are some interesting patterns or lack of them. So everyone knows that the weather affects pain, except it's the cold and the damp, or it's the changes in the weather, or it's the cold, or it's the air pressure, or perhaps it's the warmth. So everyone knows, except we all know something different. So it did seem to be a reasonable thing to study. But it's a good challenge. Why bother? What's the point of studying this? We can do it, great, but why? And I think there's two answers to that question. The first is that understanding how the weather affects pain. The weather's made up of all sorts of different ingredients. It's pressure, it's temperature, it's wind speed, it's humidity, it's cloud cover, it's all sorts of different things. Understanding how the weather affects pain and in which health conditions could potentially lead to future interventions and therapies. So we could pass our findings over to other researchers if we find that, let's say, humidity influences pain. They can work out why it influences pain and can they intervene in that mechanism. And the second thing is that our participants often told us that it's very difficult living with arthritis because it can flare at times and you have a loss of control. You don't know when things are going to happen. And if, given that we can do weather forecasts, if we can work out how the weather influences pain, we might be able to develop pain forecasts and allow people to plan their week ahead. So we went off on a slight tangent there, but back to participant recruitment and engagement. You saw that we recruited lots of people. Here's an image that Anna, our PhD student, had generated. Our recruitment over 12 months, we kept the study open for 12 months, was 13,256 people. So far exceeding all of our expectations. We analysed geographically. There are 124 postcode areas in the UK. We only did this recently, and we're very pleased to see that we had recruitment from 124 out of 124 postcode areas. So right from the tip of Cornwall up to the Western Isles in Scotland. And we captured 5.1 million symptom scores over the course of the study. We recognised at the start of the study we were keen to keep people engaged, and we wanted them to enter their symptoms every day for 6 months or more. And that seemed like a big ask, but we recognised that at the beginning. And we tried to design into the study as many different things that we could think of that would keep people engaged through that period. So here's a list, and we'll work through them. The first was the daily prompts that we've mentioned before. So at 6:24, you got a notification on your phone, a sound or a buzz or an alert, and it said, fill in the motif, so you had a reminder. We ran weekly newsletters, so we sent out by email to all of our participants information, fun, interesting facts about the weather, about pain. We had our community submit their own pain stories that they would share with other participants, and we had a My Story every week. On the phone, you could see your own symptoms tracked through time, and some people found that very helpful. Here's a tweet from one of our participants who said that she was becoming a little bit obsessed with the graphs that she was creating. We had an online community on Health Unlocked, and here all of our participants could talk to one another and share their experience, either of participating in the study or of the challenges of living with long-term pain conditions. In the video, you saw that we were running a citizen science project. So let me just tell you a little bit more about that. We were really keen that we had people active in the study, not just as participants entering data, but that they could also interact with the data and really feel part of the study and see the data for themselves. We collaborated with a group called the Office for Creative Research in New York, and their data visualization specialist, Jer Thorpe, was the former artist-in-residence at the New York Times. And with Jer and his team, we developed this citizen science study whereby you could interact with the data and try and spot the relationships and submit your ideas or hypotheses. So you can see here a two-dimensional graph of one person's pain over 5 days. So they start on a Monday with moderate pain, the pain goes lower on Tuesday and Wednesday, and then the pain goes up through Thursday and Friday. And then Jer and his team turned multiple graphs, two-dimensional graphs, they put them back to back and generated a three-dimensional landscape of pain. And as we had increasing numbers of participants, you could scroll backwards and forwards through this landscape and see how the pain had changed for populations of people, with each slice of the landscape representing one person's symptoms. And then in time, we put the pain landscape alongside a weather landscape, and then you could try and spot patterns by comparing one to the other. And you could scroll down through the landscape, you could change which symptom you were looking at, pain or fatigue or morning stiffness, and you could change which weather variable, temperature or pressure or humidity, and you could change whether it's the daily average or the maximum or the minimum. And having played around with this and explored, you could then submit your theories based on the data that you'd seen. So first of all, you were asked, do you think that symptoms and weather are correlated based on what you've seen? And if you said yes, it moved you on to the next part of the question, which said, which symptom do you think is linked to weather? So you say, I think pain here is influenced by temperature. And then moving on to part 3, do you think it's an increase or a decrease in temperature that causes an increase or a decrease in pain? And then what about that lag effect? Is it on the same day, or 1 day ago, or 2 days ago, or more? And the idea here was that as people submitted their hypotheses, it might allow us to kind of circle in on what we thought was the more significant result. We did lots of public engagement through 2016. So here you can see Louise and John, part of the team, who are here today, taking the touch screen, giant touch screens. We've also brought our touch screen along. It's outside. On tour, we're at the Cheltenham Science Festival, and we're having the public interact with these, the Citizen Science Project. Then we got a bit carried away, and we turned the landscape into an installation outside of the town hall for the Manchester Day Parade. It looked beautiful. It was there for half a day, and then it poured with rain, and it got very soggy. But it was a lot of fun. So we recruited high numbers of people. We tried to keep them engaged. And in this next section, I'm going to describe some of the methods that we used to analyze the data. I'm going to show you some selected results. So I'm going to talk first about recruitment and retention. You've seen how many people we recruited, but did we retain them in the study? And then secondly, we'll touch on the weather and pain. And I thought now was an appropriate time to give you a warning that I'm not going to share the final results. I'm sorry. Now, previously, when I've given talks, I've always been able to say, that's because we don't know the results. It's taken us an awfully long time to analyze the data, and even 18 months after finishing collecting the data, we didn't know the results, so I could honestly say I don't know the results. That's not the case anymore. We do know the results, and we've recently submitted the publication, and we expect there to be lots of attention with that, and we've been advised not to share the results in advance, but I will give you some teasers. Okay, anyway, the one that you were really excited about, I know, was the recruitment and retention figures. So let me tell you about that first of all. So the first question here is whether people who are participating in our study, are they representative of people who've got chronic pain? So you might think, well, it's great doing a smartphone study, but it doesn't really capture the people that you're interested in. So we looked at the first 6 months of data, and we analysed engagement patterns in 6,000 people who were registered in our first 2 months of the study and followed up for 6 months. So here's their age distribution. You can see each dot represents a single age, 1 year age band. And the most common age group that we had were in their 50s. It's important that we think about, is it representative of a chronic pain population? And so we compared to other published literature of people living with chronic pain. We're in green here, the other study's in blue, and you can see the shape of the distribution is about right. And as you might expect, in the older age groups, the people who may be less likely to have a smartphone, we're slightly underrepresented there. And interestingly, we were also underrepresented in the younger age groups who are more likely to have a smartphone, but they probably just can't be bothered. once we'd recruited people, do they stay in the study? And this is, in epidemiological terms, this is about selection bias. So do the right people come into the study? That's a selection bias into the study. And this is about selection bias out of the study. So you can lose people who may not be representative. Now, the graph I'm about to show you, I hadn't seen before we started the study. And had I seen it, we may not have embarked on the study. This is app churn rates from the industry. So this is industry standards of how long people will stay engaged with an app having downloaded it. On the x-axis, you can see days since installing the app, and the graph is the proportion of people that will open the app on those days. So only 30% of people open an app on day 2 having installed it on day 1. So there we were thinking that we'd have huge numbers of participants taking part, but actually only 1 in 3 people open it on day 2. And when you get down to the end of the second week, you've only got 12% of people opening an app. But thankfully, we didn't know that. We did know that it's hard to keep people engaged with apps, and so we were interested in seeing the patterns of engagement in our study. Each line here represents one person, and each dot on the line represents a day on which they entered their symptoms. And you can see there's very different types of patterns, but actually it's quite hard to summarize that in a single figure. Normally in epidemiology, we'll send out questionnaires once every 6 months, and so we can say our response rate, the first 6-monthly questionnaire was 84%. Of our 100 people, 84 of them sent it back, so that's an easy number. How do we describe this? And in fact, we had to take the project along to the Alan Turing Institute summer school, where we had 3 interns work on this challenge with us. The Alan Turing Institute's National Centres of Excellence in Mathematics and Computer Science. And they did a fantastic job using something called hidden Markov models, where they identified states of engagement. And you can see here, for each individual, they identified a state of high engagement and states of low engagement, coloured in dark and light grey. And this was all related to the probability that you would enter your symptom the following day. And they then clustered these groups into 4 clusters, and we named these high engagement at the bottom, where you can see people are entering data almost every day. The medium engagers, who entered data roughly half of the time, but stayed within the study. There was the low engagement group, who stayed in for about a week. And then what we called the tourists, who came for a day and then cleared off, never to be seen again. And the exciting thing for us when we did this analysis was that this kind of made sense in terms of clusters, but it was that 1 in 7 of our participants fell into this high engagement group. So if you remember from the industry standards, about 12% of people will open an app after week 2. 1 in 7 of our participants were entering data every day for 6 months or more. So we've got a bit of audience participation coming up. You've got to work out who is in each cluster. Okay? So we've got the high, medium, low, and tourist groups. And first question relates to their age. So is the high engagement group older or younger? Okay, so hands up for older and hands up for younger. Oh, look, you're very good. You're absolutely right that the high engagement group were older than the medium, low, and tourists. And I won't even ask you the next question, because I think you'll know that it was the men that made up proportionally more of the tourists. But interestingly, when we looked by weather belief, the belief of the participants that weather was related to their pain, we didn't see any difference. This is one thing that we thought may differentiate who stays in or out of the study. Those people who really believed in a relationship would stay in, and those people who didn't would lose interest and drop out. But in fact, there was no difference in this or any of the other variables that we'd measured. So we'd not done a smartphone study. Other people hadn't either, so we were interested to try and learn why people had stayed engaged. This participant said, my taking part in your project has opened me up to so many new and fun experiences and to a more realistic and effective management of my condition. I do look forward to seeing the results as they are published. This second quote, I'm finding the graph data fascinating. Plus, it's great to have a chance to chart my illness in so many ways, giving new information to my rheumatology consultant as all data can be printed off. Also, extra information for medics, benefits agencies, etc. So people really valued taking part and they got something out of it. I think that's one of the important reasons why the study was successful in its recruitment and engagement, because our participants, it was useful to them as well as to us. And here's somebody tweeting saying, as a serial research participant, this was my favourite study so far, so creative and relevant. So I may have a slight selection bias in choosing this tweet, but I think it reflects some of the good things that happen within the study. So recruitment and retention, we're really proud of this. We think this is a huge success, and we've seen through the course of time other mobile health studies publishing results about retention and engagement, and we're doing much better than anything else that's been published so far. So that's great. Now, on to weather and pain. What are we going to do with these 5.1 million symptom scores? So for the first year when we were collecting data, we were just really excited to see the numbers going up, but we didn't really have to worry about analysing the data. But once it was all in, then the hard work began. Now I'm going to describe how we went about analysing it, inspired by Anna, our PhD student, who recently did some stand-up comedy based on Cloudy with a Chance of Pain. And the study design really relates to what we all do at home every day. So science at home, here I am, fit and well and healthy and happy. I'm on holiday here. I look like this every day, except for some days when I feel slightly less well and think, why do I feel like this? What is it that I did differently that made me feel like this as opposed to my usual happy self? And I look back in time and I wonder whether that cloud water, see I'm keeping the cloud theme going, whether that was different to the green healthy juice that I drink every other day. And we can take these experiments that we all do at home and apply them at work. So science at work, we are interested in comparing good days to bad days, and then we look back in time at the exposure and wonder whether there's a difference between these two exposure patterns. And this is epidemiology. In epidemiology, we're interested in the causal relationship between exposures and outcome. Does the fact that you were exposed to this drug mean that you had a higher rate of this side effect, for example? But here we're interested in weather and pain. It turns out that these sort of experiments that we all do every day has a study design that was invented by Malcolm McClure. He's a Canadian epidemiologist. This was invented in the 1990s, and he was able to work out the mathematics of this. In his first study, he was interested in whether sexual activity increased the risk of having a myocardial infarction or a heart attack. And so he took the heart attack here at time 0 and looked in the 2 hours before and tried to understand whether people had had any sexual activity in that time period and whether the amount of sexual activity was different from a 2-hour time window a day earlier when they hadn't had a heart attack. So we'd read papers about this. We wanted to do the best possible job. So we got in touch with Malcolm and recruited him to the team, and he was very kind in joining us to help analyse our data. So here we are in an analysis meeting. This is a typical meeting that we ran every week. You can see Anna here on the left. Anna's a PhD student with us. Mark and Jamie, biostatisticians. John, an epidemiologist. I'll introduce the biscuits that were a common feature of our study meetings. And then by Skype, you can see Malcolm McClure, the inventor of the case crossover design, who joined us each week, and Antonio Gasparini from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine as one of our several collaborators around the world who are helping us analysing this data. And Antonio has a recent MRC grant to advance the methodology that Malcolm invented into its latest iteration. Here's my calendar. Our Cloudy Collaborator analysis meeting here at 4 o'clock on a Thursday, and it had to be 4 o'clock because Tal El-Hay from IBM Research in Haifa in Israel had at that time finished collecting his children from school and was able to get back home at 7 p.m. his time. Meanwhile, Malcolm was waking up and joining us from his breakfast table at 8 a.m. So this was the only time that we could hold them. So using the case crossover analysis, this is what we had to do. We had to identify pain events. We had to have a binary outcome. We'd measured pain on a 5-point scale, so it was none, mild, moderate, severe, or very severe. But for this study design, you had to have something happen or not. So we had to define pain events, and that took us, surprisingly, several months to work out how best to do that. And the answer to that was that we looked at a 2 or more category increase in pain from the previous day. So here you can see the motif, the pain severity here. The question is, how bad was your pain today? And here somebody scored a moderate pain, so the 5-point scale on the left, moderate yesterday, and then today you scored very severe pain, and so you've moved 2 categories up, and so that is then a pain event. So we identify moments at which people had a pain event and compared them to moments when they didn't have a pain event and look back in the preceding time window to see what weather they were exposed to and was there a difference between that. So here's the teaser to the results, because I thought I couldn't show you no results because then I'd have to get escorted from the building. But what I'm going to show you, not the results of the analysis, but the results of the raw data that we collected and the distribution of pain events through the 15 months that we collected data. So you're going to see the proportion of eligible people, so the people who are actively reporting symptoms and who could have had a pain event over the 15-month calendar period from January 2016 through to April 2017. It's as a heat map, so the proportion goes from 38% in green through to 48% in red. And here's an example of a calendar month, and you can see that the hottest area is on January the 18th. So the highest proportion of people were having a pain event on January the 18th. And so in our study design, we're interested in whether the weather in the 18th, the 17th, and the preceding days is in some way different from other days when the pain event is less common. Okay, so here it is. This is January 2016. It's going to scroll from left to right because we can't fit it all in one screen. Here it is. Here are the results. I warned. I hope you didn't blink. So that's it fitted in. So you can see from January 2016 through to April 2017, that's the pattern that we saw. And when we first saw this, we were very excited because it does look as though there is some relationship through the seasons. But I can give you one exclusive result from our analysis, which is that pain events are most frequent on Mondays. Scientifically proven. So coming up, what have we got lined up? Last week, we submitted the results to the New England Journal of Medicine. This is the highest impact medical journal. We have no idea whether they're going to accept it. It's a very high bar, but we'll have a go. It would be nice to think that this was our publication, but actually it does say just submitted rather than accepted, but we'll see how we get on in the coming weeks and months. We've developed, together with a different data visualization company, iCoex, an interactive data map, because again, we're keen that people can explore the data for themselves. Our giant touchscreen is outside. Some of the team are going to be there with the touchscreen after, so you can have a play around with this. And what you can do with the interactive data map is you can select anywhere in the country, and then you can select any date through 2016, and you can see how bad the symptoms were at that location, and then you can compare it to a different location in the country. So you can move through time and see how the weather conditions changed and how the symptoms changed, and can you spot any patterns there? And actually, was it some way different on the same day in Brighton compared to how it was in Manchester? So please do have a go on that, and that's now on our study website as well, cloudywithachanceofpain.com. When you go home, you can try it out. The One Show have done some pre-recording with us already in anticipation of the results. So we think it's going to get a bit of attention when the results come out. I think I've got to go on another sofa, apparently, which I'm looking forward to. And then we've got some other work lined up. So let me show you this short film.
Just take a look at this weather system moving in, bringing with it low pressure and rain. So if you live down in Devon, ow.
A weather map of the future? Perhaps. But exactly what goes on the map will be determined by the experiences of those who take part in the Cloudy with a Chance of Pain study.
So we're just submitting a grant application now to do the pain forecast that we thought would be one of the benefits for patients. We've also designed another study following the same study design. We're interested in finding moments at which symptoms are worse and then trying to understand what is it that happened just before that. And like the weather, a question that comes up in clinic every week is about diet and nutrition. So here's a leaflet from Arthritis Research UK about diet and arthritis, a 24-page leaflet. And if you look through it, the guidance really is just you should have a healthy diet and don't eat so much that you get overweight, because that's going to put extra weight through your joints, which is all true, but it's not really answering the question that patients want to know, is that are there certain food groups that I should avoid or that I should eat? And again, it's just a very difficult thing to study, because to do so, you have to track your symptoms through time, you have to track your dietary intake through time, and diet's even harder than weather, because you could eat anything, and then we have to code that such that we can analyse it. And that has to have an army of dietitians involved and a very large amount of paper. Except in our smartphone era, maybe we can use the technology. And in fact, there are lots of dietary tracking apps that really lower the burden and turn what would otherwise be unstructured information into structured, coded data. And so we've designed this study called Eat Yourself Better, and we're just working through some of the last details to get this finalised and funded. So let me conclude. Cloudy with a Chance of Pain. I think we've shown that we can do mass participation smartphone studies. We were delighted to find that we could, people would do sustained data entry, and I know some of our Cloudy participants are in the room, and we're really grateful to everyone who took part. Hands up if we've got any participants. So thank you all, that's wonderful. We've done public engagement that's been really enjoyable, and I think the best thing about this study is that it's been really fun, and we've had a fantastic team. If you've enjoyed this, there are a couple of World Service broadcasts that have the study featured within it. One called The Data Donators, one called Does Weather Affect Our Health? Dave, our resident meteorologist, was featured on that too. And so I just need to thank several people. I need to thank our funders, Now Versus Arthritis, the MRC for the pilot study, the Wellcome Trust for the data walkway. But it's not just me, of course. There are a lot of people involved in this very complex interdisciplinary study. People from the university here, our external collaborators, the technology partners, the data visualization partners in analysis, the funders. And here today are also some of the team that I'd also like to thank, particularly if you would just stand up briefly and take a bow. John Macbeth, epidemiologist, thank you, John. Jamie Sargent. Louise Cook, here with her mum, who's also a Cloudy participant, Caroline Sanders, David Schultz, and Anna Birkenhorst, our PhD student and stand-up comedian. Thank you very much indeed. It's been a real pleasure to share the journey that we've taken so far, and I hope that we can come back and show you the results soon. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much to Professor Dixon for a fascinating talk. We do have some time for some questions. There are some students with some roving mics, I think. So yeah, lady in the corner.
Hello. I noticed that you mainly went on about rheumatoid arthritis. Was any of the app associated with any other chronic pains?
Yeah, so the eligibility criteria for the study were that people had to be 17 years or above, had to live in the UK, own a smartphone, and then they had to have any long-term pain condition. So we had more musculoskeletal conditions than others, but we also had migraine, neuropathic pain, and within musculoskeletal we had lots of different types of arthritis, we had chronic widespread pain, fibromyalgia.
Hi, thanks for a very interesting talk. That was very good. I'm not an epidemiologist, so this question may be very basic to you, but if you've got 7 million people that you've shown off the project to on the television, and you get 13,000 respondents, and of those 1 in 7 carry on through, it's still a huge number of people. But how do you know that you can extrapolate the results on those people who are motivated to respond to the general population?
No, it is a really important point, and that's why we did that part of the study where we're comparing the characteristics of our participants to what we see to be normal from a chronic pain population. So where we did that, as I showed you, that we had slightly fewer in the older groups and slightly fewer in the younger groups. And that matters sometimes, and when it matters is where the people that you've recruited would in some way have a different relationship between the exposure and the outcome. And we wouldn't actually expect the age distribution to affect the way in which weather influenced your pain. So we're not too concerned about that. The retention is important, so are we having people drop out who are in some way different? And in some of the usual epidemiology designs, like cohort studies, where you follow 2 groups of people forwards through time, if one group drops out, then you lose sometimes people who would have been more susceptible than others. In the case crossover design, actually you're comparing the change within a person. So even if you drop out sooner, that doesn't invalidate the results. So because of the study design, that really helps address the question that you raised.
Thank you for an excellent presentation. Just a couple of questions. You showed a map of the UK with the sort of response density, and I think you got every response from every postcode, which is great. But it wasn't up very long, but I noticed almost a line that ran from southwest to northeast, where most of the respondents were in the north and few in the south. Did I read that correctly? If so, is there an explanation for that?
Well, the area that had the greatest coverage was Manchester, and you know, whether that's because people here locally knew about the study from the group, but then once we then ranked the other postcode areas, there was quite a good distribution across the country. I mean, I think that's somewhat artificial because it's all related to kind of the density of where people happen to live. So it looks as though we haven't got people recruited in Wales, but then one postcode area actually covers a very large area.
And if I may ask just a second question, how did you control for, I mean, I could ask a question to a better person in this. If you take arthritis, don't you get variability from day to day, irrespective of anything else in terms of the acuteness of the condition? How do you control for that?
Yeah, you do, absolutely. And so some of the day-to-day variability is accounted for by the fact that we're tracking people over long periods of time. So we're taking multiple pain events People are having pain events roughly on a fortnightly basis when we look at the numbers. So some of that is kind of ironed out by having multiple events through the course of time. But we're actually interested in whether those pain events are in some way different in their weather exposure, and that's what the design is there to test. So are those times when you are having the higher pain? Well, we know that that's the case. Some people do get more pain on some days, but is that related to the weather? And so looking at the weather in those periods helps us address that.
Was it possible to get the air pressure statistics from your grab of the GPS data?
Yes, so we collected all of the weather data that was available from the Met Office through their API. And so if you have a look at the interactive data map, what we're showing there is temperature and pressure and wind speed and humidity. Yeah. So I think those are the 4 things that are graphed on the data map, but we had all the other data as well, so things like precipitation or rainfall, and though we analysed all of them.
How do you factor in people's perceptions of pain as well? Because it's a very variable thing. You know, some people can take a lot of pain and wouldn't acknowledge some things. Is there something on the app that sort of guides people as to how to classify an event?
No, well, there isn't a guidance as to how you should report your pain, and we know this from clinical practice that some people will report very high levels of pain, and other people will be very stoic and report very low levels of pain for what we think is a similar type of severity of arthritis, for example. And again, it's the study design, the case crossover design, that really helps us here, because although somebody might be reporting above average pain and somebody else below average pain, what we're interested in is with the within-person change. So we're asking within a person, so if you happen to be a more stoical and lower pain reporting, we're still interested in pain events for you, so a 2-unit increase for you, and it might be from none to moderate, and that's a pain event for you, whereas the person who tends to report more pain, their pain event would be a moderate to very severe.
I think there's another question just next to it.
Is it possible that there's a psychosomatic element in this? In other words, if people see the evening weather forecast and it's going to be rotten tomorrow, and they're thinking to themselves, blimey, I'm going to be rotten tomorrow, is there perhaps a psychosomatic element to it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this was one of the things that we were particularly concerned about. We weighed up at the beginning of the study whether we should blind people to the study hypothesis. But through the piloting of the study, one of the things that really had people engaged was the fact that they were contributing to answering this question of weather and pain. We couldn't blind people to the weather around them. So we're putting masks on all of our participants, and then we have several admissions to A&E. So we tried to deal with it in the analysis. So I guess when we design studies, you can either design away that challenge, or you can analyse away the challenge. So we collected people's beliefs at the beginning. So if you had a strong belief, it may be that you are subject to that reporting bias, that you believe that it was sunshine and therefore you would report less pain on those days. And in fact, when we did stratified analysis and we looked at people with high or low beliefs, we didn't see any difference in the results, which was all very reassuring. And in fact, the results that we did see were not explained by the possible biases.
There's another one there, and then the one in the middle.
Thank you. Very nice presentation. I'm just curious, assuming this weather map gets developed and you're able to forecast what you expect in the way of pain, what measures do you anticipate people taking to deal with it?
Well, our patient participants and our public and patient involvement group have guided us on this, because they're the people who live with these pain conditions day to day. And it is around planning their activities. So I think if you were to know that you were going to have a more painful day on Thursday, and you knew that you needed to paint a fence or do the shopping, then you might plan to do that earlier in the week and avoid the day that you thought that the pain was going to be a bit higher.
I noticed in the 3 nanoseconds that the results were on the screen that certainly, you know, there did seem to be a tendency that Monday was a bad day for lots of people. But I also noticed that the weekends seemed to be consistently better for people.
Yeah.
And I just wondered whether that was something to do with their behaviour or their feelings at the weekend, particularly if they're in work, compared with the weekday, and whether that was something you'd examined.
I'm sure it is. But again, the weather doesn't know that it's the weekend. So it doesn't, although people are reporting lower pain then, we will systematically be looking at the differences in the weather between those periods that are higher and lower. But you're right, when we ran the analysis, there was a significant difference between the weekends and the weekdays.
There's one just next to you.
Are you going to send a few people to Tenerife as a test control?
I did say that there's always one.
Hi, thank you for the presentation, it's excellent. I was wondering, you've talked a lot about correlation. Is there a theoretical basis to a possible link between the weather and pain levels? As a doctor, is there a reason why there might be a link, or could it be on cold days you put clothes on, which is a painful thing to do, or you might just stay inside and that would have an effect?
I mean, as I mentioned, there have been lots of studies about the relationship between weather and pain, and all of those publications have theorised as to why this might be, and there are some studies that look into it directly. So with temperature, it's thought that that might affect pain sensitivity, so the extent to which a stimulus causes pain, and temperature is thought to influence that. With pressure, we know that there are anatomical changes in the joints, so in an inflammatory arthritis like rheumatoid arthritis, you've got fluid that accumulates in the joints, it puts pressure on the joint capsule, which causes pain, and therefore, in theory, as you change the barometric pressure, maybe that has an influence on that pressure. In degenerative arthritis like osteoarthritis, you have bone cysts, and so perhaps it has an influence through things like that. There's less known about possible mechanisms with things like humidity, although lots of patients talk about the damp affecting their pain.
Okay, I think we've got time for a couple more.
Whether in certain parts of the world is more predictable in terms of, let's say, monsoons and dry season. Is there any correlation if you're equivalent to that part of the world in a similar study?
Well, I don't think anyone's done a study similar to this one currently. I think a few people are trying to follow it, and in fact, some people are doing a blinded study where they happen to have tracked symptoms and using the GPS to pull the weather. But I don't think we know the answer to that yet, because similar studies haven't happened like this, although there are plenty of anecdotes of people in certain climates thinking that the pain is influenced by the weather, like the foehn winds.
For those of us who did the app religiously, will you be continuing to keep the app active and putting any more results on that, or different ways of looking at the analysis?
Well, we'll be sharing the results of the analysis with all of the participants. So we've got newsletters lined up for you, so your inbox will start filling up as we get towards results day. Yeah, so we've really valued the participation of everyone, and we want to get the news to you before everyone else.
But you won't be shutting the app down just yet?
No, we don't plan to, although we're not paying you motif, but because the study's finished, but they're happy for people to continue using the app, so we haven't heard any other news from them that they're planning to discontinue.
Right, thank you very much. I'm afraid we've run out of time for questions, but there will be drinks and canapes, and I'm sure Will be sticking around, and there's lots of the project team as well. You know who they are now. So do go and ask them questions and have a look at the giant screen. Before you depart, as I have a captured audience, I'm going to plug a couple more events. So we have our next Your Manchester Insights event is Brexit on the Brink. That's taking place on the 27th of March. Should be lively. And then our annual Cockcroft Rutherford lecture takes place on the 30th of May. And that's with our guest speaker and alumna Dorothy Byrne. And Dorothy is the head of news and current affairs at Channel 4 Television. Places for these events can be booked via our website or via alumni-events@manchester.ac.uk, or collar one of us outside for more information. So please do continue these discussions and ask the project group questions over drinks and canapes. But please do join me again in thanking Professor Dixon for a brilliant talk.